That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, I am very excited to bring y'all this video. We have done so much research outlining two running backs here that I think people are just getting completely wrong this season. I mean, these are the two guys that I feel like I have to talk about most in the live streams that we do every single night. Two guys that I get the most questions about. So I wanted to really lay out my exact analysis behind them and why I am willing to draft one and think that we need to be completely avoiding the other player. But yeah, before we get into the video, I will say, if you have yet to hear for whatever reason, guys, every single night we are doing live streams drafting real money fantasy football drafts on Underdog Fantasy. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the bell next to the subscribe button. That way you can come out to those live streams. And make sure you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy. When you sign up and make a $10 deposit, they're adding $25 to your account. You're getting our 2021 fantasy football rankings, our 2021 fantasy football tiers, our 2021 fantasy football draft guide, our 2021 dynasty rookie draft guide. You are getting all of that for a $10 deposit, and you would not believe how much that helps support this channel. So if you appreciate these videos whatsoever and you can't support the show on Patreon, that is completely fine. A $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, I mean, is a ton of support. And at the same time, if we hit 10,000 signups on Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, which we get like 30,000 views a day, this should be no problem. Let's get this done today so we can get these plans made. But we'll host a Flock meetup in Florida, and to go along with this, Underdog is going to fly people out for it and to go to a Tampa Bay Buccaneers game with me. So yeah, that should be it. Let's go through and let's talk about these running backs. Let's start it off with Joe Mixon. Okay, so here with Joe Mixon, I will say on Underdog Fantasy, y'all know I've done well over 100 drafts at this point. I've drafted Joe Mixon in 14% of those leagues, and in a 12-man format, the average expectation is going to be actually 8.3%. So I am extremely overweight on Joe Mixon here. And I'm fine with it. I'm excited to take Joe Mixon in the second round, and I am just ready to hear all the casual fantasy football players coming out going, oh, Mason, great talent, but he fails us every single season. He failed us last year. He failed us in 2019. That means we can't draft him this season. That is such a simple-minded way to view things. That is such a baseline level of analysis, not understanding how context changes season to season, how draft prices changes as well, because now we are getting Joe Mixon at a cheaper price in a significantly better situation. And I want to outline exactly what we have had from Joe Mixon, exactly the talent level of Mixon, and I want to destroy the narratives that are currently circulating around him that I think are completely false. Now, if we go through, you look at his ADP, Joe Mixon is currently going in Underdog leagues at pick 20 overall. Now, I've seen in a lot of drafts that people have been sending me on Patreon for team breakdowns, I've actually seen him going at the 2-3 turn. And I think that that is a ridiculous price for Joe Mixon. I mean, in a $250 draft that we recently did on the live stream, I actually was able to get Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon to start off that draft. That should never, and I repeat, never happen in a 12-man league. And here with the Joe Mixon, I really think he is the same thing as taking Ezekiel Elliott in the second round. If you're willing to spend a top 5 pick on Ezekiel Elliott, I think you should be willing to at least consider Joe Mixon in the middle of the second round. You should be ecstatic to draft him at the back half of the second round, because we go through, and this is someone that in 2020, yes, it's very misleading to look at the actual statistics that we have with the Joe Mixon in 2020, given the fact that we have one massive spike week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Thomas can throw up the game log for y'all right here. And what I really want to point out is the change in his usage in the receiving game after that Jacksonville Jaguars game. Now, it's a very limited sample. It's a very limited sample, but we have seen that Zach Taylor is starting to use Joe Mixon a little more in the receiving game, which for those PPR formats is crucial. We'll get to this a little bit later in the real receiving upside that I think Joe Mixon possesses. But still, here, he finishes as the running back 10 on a points per game basis. Now, I know it's skewed because that one blow-up game, and it's also a small sample. But we look at this overall. I mean, he's someone that we know he's getting 2.8 red zone touches per game. So this is someone that they want to give the ball when they get to the red zone. That is extremely important in trying to predict the touchdown rate that he is going to have this upcoming season. He's also someone that, I mean, Last year, he averaged over 4 targets a game. And I'm saying that's 100% happening again. I'm saying Joe Mixon, lock him in for 4 targets a game. Lock him in for 15 to 20 carries a game. This is going to be a workhorse running back. We saw the usage change in the Jacksonville Jaguars game. We saw how it was trending, and we'll get to it in 1 second, why I think this trend is going to continue. And let's go through and let's talk about just the horrible narratives that we have centered around Joe Mixon currently and why people are scared to draft him this season. So going back to 2019, I cannot deny the fact Joe Mixon was a massive bust. Joe Mixon was someone that, I mean, if you drafted, you most likely lost your league. And here he finished as the running back 20 on a per game basis. Now, what we really have to look at with Joe Mixon is the context that this was done with. So everybody, and I repeat, everybody and their mom is completely willing, and I am as well, to overlook the down year for Ezekiel Elliott last season, given the fact that he was playing on one of the worst offenses in the NFL after the Dak Prescott injury, after his offensive line went through multiple injuries in their own right, and you saw their offense turn to a bottom 10 offense in the entire league. Well, at the same time, Joe Mixon, he played on a team that was dead last in football. It was dead last. They got the first overall pick to draft Joe Burrow for a reason. Joe Mixon in 2019 was in a way, and I repeat, way worse situation than what you actually had is with Ezekiel Elliott this past season. Yet, because people aren't really wanting to take the time to remember the context that he put up those statistics in, if anything, I want to say that it's impressive as hell that Joe Mixon was able to go out there and on the worst team in football that earned the first overall pick, be able to put a mid running back 1 season up. I'm sorry, a mid running back 2 season up, but I mean, in the second half of the year, he was a mid running back 1 on a per game basis in fantasy. Now, it didn't really matter. And this is where a lot of people who drafted Joe Mixon, they're not necessarily paying attention to this, because the problem is if you drafted Joe Mixon in 2019, I mean, his production in the second half of the season didn't matter whatsoever because he was so bad in the first half because this team was the worst team in football that, I mean, you were already out of it. You weren't playing in the fantasy football playoffs. But if you look after the bye week, Joe Mixon on the worst team in football was the running back 7 on a per game basis after week 9. That has to mean something. It has to mean something that Joe Mixon was a mid running back 1 for the second half of the season in 2019. Everybody wants to overlook it with how bad he was at the beginning of the year, which I understand, guys. I'm standing by you. Yes, it was very frustrating, but at the same time, the worst team in football, one of the worst offensive lines in football. He was playing in an offense with Andy Dalton, and then I can't even remember the backup's name that got in there in 2019. But regardless, we'll go to 2018. And in 2018, Joe Mixon, I mean, the most common comment that I get down there in the comment section is Joe Mixon's never been a running back 1 in fantasy. And I get so many comments in the comment section that are just factually incorrect. In 2018, Joe Mixon, a top 10 running back on a per game basis, which of course is impressive, but to go along with this, what we really have to look at is the context that it was done in. Okay, let's go context, because we have to try to figure out what talent Joe Mixon is and look at how that context has changed for this season. So he was the running back 9 on a per game basis. This was a team that had Andy Dalton start 11 games, and Jeff Driscoll started 5 games for this team in 2018. And in that horrendous situation, everybody, it doesn't matter. You go ask your grandma, you go ask your cousin. It doesn't matter who you're asking. Everybody knows that Joe Burrow is a significantly better quarterback than that pairing, and this offense is going to be dramatically better. And now we go through and go, okay, well, now you're actually drafting him as a mid running back 2. We've already seen him be a top 10 running back in a worse situation. And let's go and let's talk about 2020 in particular, because I know 2020 doesn't necessarily look like it's that big of a change going into 2021. But guys, it is a night and day difference from what you have with this offense last year compared to this year. I know a lot of people want to focus in and just act like the offensive line didn't get upgraded because they didn't draft Penei Sewell. And while, yes, I understand that a lot of people wanted them to draft Sewell, and I understand that a lot of people have strong arguments on why he may have been a better draft pick, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to go through and take an objective stance on how this team has changed. Well, this team has objectively upgraded their offensive line. They've objectively gotten their best offensive lineman back and healthy. They've added more depth to the overall unit, and this should be a better offensive line this season than it was last year. Yes, I'm not saying it's a good offensive line, but at the same time, we're trying to compare his previous production and put it in a different context and try to presume what we are going to have going forward. And at the same time, guys, we have Joe Burrow going into year 2. This is supposed going to be Joe Burrow's big jump up because he gets Jamar Chase coming in. And what is so significant and what a lot of people fail to realize with the Cincinnati Bengals team is how slow this team was last year. We know the Chiefs, I mean, they are known for, as well as the Baltimore Ravens, putting speed throughout their entire offense, and that it gives their running backs, I mean, just a ton of space to operate, in that they can't stack boxes against them. Well, we look at this receiver core last year, and this is the big reason why they drafted Jamar Chase. I don't know how nobody talks about this, but you look at this. T. Higgins ran a 4.59 40-yard dash. Tyler Boyd, a 4.58 40-yard dash. Two extremely slow receivers. I like both of these receivers, and you don't have to be fast to be a talented receiver, but you have to have some element to speed to your overall offense to unlock it and to allow those slower players some more space underneath. And I know they have A.J. Green. A.J. Green ran like a 4.50 40-yard dash, but he was 32 years old. I mean, I don't think his 40-yard dash means anything for a 32-year-old wide receiver when he came into the combine a decade ago. So you're looking at this offense being littered with extremely slow receivers that could not take the top off the defense. So you had a ton of stacked boxes going up against Joe Mixon. And at the same time, I mean, he couldn't do anything about it because there was no receiver that could take the top off. So Jamar Chase coming in. I know a lot of people want to say, well, Mason, Jamar Chase is struggling. It doesn't matter. They're going to have to drop two safeties back more times than not because Jamar Chase does present that deep threat. So that's going to allow Joe Mixon to go up against a lot lighter boxes this upcoming season. To go along with this, there are some other narratives that we need to discuss. Let's go to the injury narrative, because a big thing that a lot of people talk about with Joe Mixon is Mason, he's injury prone. He's injury prone. You can't draft him. He's injury prone. Has anybody fact checked this? Has anybody gone through and actually looked at Joe Mixon and how many games he's missed throughout his career? Because he was drafted in 2017. You go through, yes, he missed the majority of the season last year, but let's remember what happened last year. Let's remember he suffered that mid-foot sprain and he was supposed to be out for about 6 weeks, right? Because we remember that, I mean, you could actually put a player on the IR and they wouldn't count against your roster spot. And I believe you only had to be out for about 3 or 4 weeks projected for a team to go through and commit that player to the IR because they had some weird COVID rules, yada, yada, yada. And the Bengals decided not to do that. They said this injury is not serious enough to do that. We think that we can potentially get Joe Mixon back in 2 or 3 weeks. So they went through, let's say, not put him on the injured reserve. So Joe Mixon was supposed to come back halfway through last year. And what happened to make Joe Mixon not come back? Joe Burrow tears his ACL. Joe Burrow tears his ACL. They've already signed Joe Mixon to some massive contract. So there's absolutely no reason whatsoever for them to bring him back and maybe increase the chances of him getting re-injured when they have him attached to that deal. No, the season's over. When Joe Burrow tears up his knee, they're just packing it in. They're playing for 2021. So Joe Mixon missed the majority of the season last year, but it's not like he needed to. It's because of the Joe Burrow injury that went through, and it was at the wrong place, the wrong time. And in 2019, missed no games whatsoever, 0 games missed. In 2018, he missed 2 games with a knee sprain. In 2017, his rookie season, he missed 2 games with a concussion. So we have 4 games missed total outside of this foot injury where we don't necessarily know how many games would have been missed. Just assume that it would have possibly been 4 because I think they would have put him on the IR right away. They could have had him back in 3. So let's just assume worst case scenario, he misses 4 or 5 games this past year. And this is a player that through the course of 4 years in his NFL career, he's missed 8 games total. And to go along with this, it would be concerning if it's a hamstring strain, a groin strain. It's all these soft tissue injuries that kind of are connected. No, it's a concussion. It's a knee sprain. It's a foot sprain. Completely different areas of the body. Nothing to do related to each other. I think calling Joe Mixon injury prone is just ignorant, to be completely honest. I think you're not doing enough research. I think you're not looking into the situation enough. Joe Mixon, not injury prone in the slightest. And what unlocks Joe Mixon this upcoming season is not Jamar Chase. It is not going to be really the offensive line. It's not going to be Joe Mixon. What unlocks Joe Mixon in fantasy this upcoming season is Giovanni Bernard going over to Tampa. Because you look at Joe Mixon, the one problem is he hasn't been used heavily in the receiving game. He's had enough usage in the receiving game, but he hasn't come close to his ceiling. Because if you remember the scouting report of Joe Mixon in that 2017 NFL draft class coming out of OU, this was supposed to be someone that was an elite receiver. You split that backfield back then with Samaje Perine, where Joe Mixon was actually the satellite back, and he had 12.7% of his college target share at the at the Oklahoma University Sooner, whatever you want to call it. It's a horrible college regardless. Hook 'em horns. And here, now that you have Giovanni Bernard leaving this situation, Giovanni Bernard's leaving behind 8 carries a game and 4 targets a game through his NFL career. Now, I don't care about those 8 carries. Those 8 carries probably are going to go to like Samaje Perine. We don't even need Joe Mixon to pick up those carries. But I can guarantee you Samaje Perine is not going to be the guy getting the targets out of the backfield. You're going to have Joe Mixon picking up, I don't want to say every single one of those targets, but he's maybe picking up, 3 of those targets on a per game basis? So I think Mixon can jump up to be a running back, getting 6 targets a game out of this backfield. I mean, maybe even call it 5, 6, 7. It doesn't matter. What shows is the fact that Joe Mixon's going to be a bell cow running back in a much better situation this upcoming year. You can't just look at what we had the past 2 years and stop there. You have to look at the context behind it. You have to really understand what we are going to be expecting in 2021. And this is why I think getting Joe Mixon is getting discount Ezekiel Elliott. I'm taking him at the end of the second round consistently. That's why I have him in a lot more leagues than I have an average player in. So yeah, go out there and draft Joe Mixon with confidence. I'm starting my drafts off a lot of the times with Devontae Adams, Joe Mixon, and I'm completely fine with it. And now going over to our next running back that we need to discuss. Let me get out a rant on Damien Harris here. Okay, so with Damien Harris, I mean, this is a running back that I think, yes, he's rising in drafts with the Sony Michel trade, but I don't think he should be rising. I think that Damien Harris has a severely capped ceiling based on his usage in the receiving game in a PPR format. Now, keep in mind, if you're playing in a non-PPR format, literally don't listen to me at all right now. This is exclusively for people playing in PPR leagues, because in a PPR league, running back receptions matter so much, because if you do not have them, you are simply only relying on touchdown upside. Touchdowns are the hardest thing to project season to season. And we've done some historical analysis, because the first thing I want to point out is with the Damien Harris, he's played 12 games in the NFL so far, and he's had 7 targets. Okay, so he's had 7 targets in 12 games. Now, he's only started 10 of those games. So let's say he's played in his role 10 games and he's had 7 targets. So he's having less than a target a game. This is exactly what you had from Sony Michel back in 2018. This is a specific role we have seen Bill Belichick roll out there time and time again. We have already kind of seen how this is about to shake out, where you're going to have Damien Harris in the Sony Michel role from a couple years ago. You're going to have James White playing in the James White role. And I think you're going to have Ramondre Stevenson, someone that we've been talking about before the preseason started, sliding into the Rex Burkhead role. And I think that Ramondre Stevenson is actually the guy you want in the last round of your draft, not Damien Harris in the 6th, 7th, wherever he's going now. But here with Damien Harris, we have to acknowledge the fact, less than a target a game. And we have to look historically and go, what does this mean from a fantasy football perspective? How many running backs have been able to average less than a target a game and came out and be top 12 running backs, top 24 running backs? Because if you're drafting Damien Harris as the running back 25 and you're like, oh, I just need him to be the running back 23, that's not how you play fantasy football. Go out there, draft someone with upside, actually, because I think Damien Harris has none of it. I mean, we go to 2018. So out of running backs that had less than 1 target a game, out of the top 12 guys in a points per game basis, 0 of them had less than a target a game. Out of the top 24 guys on a per game basis, 0 of them had less than a target a game. Out of the top 24 running backs in 2018. Now let's go to a different threshold, because we know, okay, well, yes, you can expect Damien Harris to get slightly better with his usage in the receiving game if Mac Jones takes over as the starter earlier than expected. So let's bump it up. Let's go. Let's say he doubles his targets per game. Let's say he goes to like 1.5, and let's move the threshold to 2 targets a game. How many running backs finished in the top 12 with 2 targets or less per game? 0. How many finished in the top 24? 2. You had like an 8% chance of going through and finishing there if you had less than 2 targets per game. Nothing. We go to 2019, something very similar. If you're looking at less than a target a game, you did not have a single guy in the top 24 that was able to accomplish that feature. And then less than 2 targets game, this is where it gets a little bit different, because this is when you have the emergence of both Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, which I think we can safely say that Damien Harris is not Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry. So in 2019, we actually had 2 running backs in the top 12 with less than 2 targets per game. We had 2 running backs in the top 24 with less than 2 targets per game as well. And then in 2020, it was the exact same thing as what we had with 2019, where in the top 12, there were 2 guys with less than 2 targets a game, and there were 2 guys in the top 24 with less than 2 targets a game. None of them in any year with less than 1 targets per game. If you have less than 1 target per game, it's almost impossible. So even if you're projecting Damien Harris to get more usage in the receiving game, historically we have seen you cannot bet on a running back with this profile. Maybe it's pretty at the end of the day. You're like, oh, I drafted a running back with 10 touchdowns. Hell yeah. Who cares if he had 10 touchdowns if you had someone in that same range like a Kareem Hunt going out there and having 50 receptions and maybe Kareem Hunt only had 6 touchdowns? Well, okay, well, maybe you had an additional, 6 times 4? I mean, let's just call it 6 times 5, 30 points from the touchdowns, and you got lucky with the Damien Harris touchdown volatility, whereas Kareem Hunt added 50 points on just based on the receptions that he saw, not even including the receiving yards. It's a cheat code in fantasy. I mean, going back, just overall, so there have been 72 finishes in the top 24 over the past 3 years. 0 of them had less than a target a game. There have been 72 finishes in the top 3 years of top 24 running backs, and how many of them had less than 2 targets per game? 4. It's a horrendous historical bet to make. You have to be so arrogant to come out here and assume that you can identify the player that's going to do that. I mean, yeah, sure. You're Derrick Henry. You're Nick Chubb. Go for it. Damien Harris ain't that. Damien Harris is Damien Harris. Let's end it there. Now, thank you, my dudes. I know a lot of y'all probably did not enjoy this video, but this was a more so in-depth research based on 2 guys where we went really hard at them. Let me know if y'all enjoyed these videos or where we talk about more players and we go a little shallower, because I think that when we go deeper on a player, y'all probably get a little more from it. But yeah, thank you again. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Hope I see you in the live stream tonight, so make sure you hit that bell. Thank you to everybody supporting the show on Patreon. We got some new members in MCGC, Brian, Matthew, Craig, Ian, Woody, Colt, Marcus, Jack, and Nicholas. Thank you, my dudes.